What's up, guys? Coach Gaglione here. This is another edition of the Powerlifting the Appeal podcast. I'm your host, Coach Gaglione, and I've been involved with powerlifting and strength coaching for over 19 years. I'll try to get the lighting a little bit better. I think that's okay. All right, so this is a prepping podcast. I'm going to be doing a little meal prep today, but I just want to kind of give my thoughts a little bit and try to. I think this will be. We're going to work with it. All right, so that looks pretty good. So, yeah, at the time of this recording, so the premise of this podcast is going to be when you should throw in the towel. When should you quit? When should you stop? And this is kind of a really tough conversation, but I think it's really important. So I wanted to just start off the podcast with a quote from Kyle Sheridan, who unfortunately, I think he got injured. Really nice guy, squatted 875. I believe he's totaled 2,000 pounds before. I think he's Rochester's first 2,000-pound total. Someone that's been on my radar for a while. But anyways, this is a kind of a quote from him, like a post that he just had, and I thought it was very fitting for this. If your coach always tells you what you want to hear, you're not being coached, you're being coddled. And one of the things that I always that stuck with me for a long time, my old wrestling coach, Rob Shaver, he was really the first like true like mentor to me. I didn't always agree with everything he did in terms of training, especially strength and conditioning. I kind of learned later on, but he did instill in me like a mental toughness, a fortitude, and he really taught me how to work hard. He taught me how to kind of grind through things, gave me a lot of grit. High school wrestling was one of the best things I ever did for my mentality. It was one of the worst things I did for my body. I had a lot of injuries. I had more pretty severe injuries. Tore my intercostal muscles my junior year, tore my hamstring my senior year, and I'm still kind of dealing with some effects of that here and there. But as far as what I've been able to accomplish with my mind, my grit, my fortitude, wrestling has been one of the best things that I've ever done. And sometimes Rob was one of those guys, and I feel like sometimes at points in my career, I've kind of felt like I've been like this as well. A real coach gives you the truth even when it's uncomfortable, because growth doesn't come from comfort. We always, one of my buddies, Zach Evanesh, he would always say, you got to get comfortable, uncomfortable. And nowadays I feel like if you give any sort of criticism, and part of coaching is constructive criticism, and there's a right and a wrong way to do it. I try to frame things in a positive way. Sometimes I get emotionally charged, especially because I've done a lot of things wrong. I've done a lot of things. I've kind of put myself at risk. I've put others at risk. And we've had a pretty good track record, I would say, as far as like people. The vast majority of people, have been injury free, kind of come out of powerlifting unscathed. And even someone like Larry, a lot of people kind of talk about some of the injuries that he's had, and sometimes like I'll just kind of say sometimes he might embellish some things, for the camera, for the reactions. But for what he's done, three-time all-time record holder, 242s, 275s, 308s. Now he's an IFBB pro bodybuilder, I guess, classic bodybuilder. He was, approaching 1,000-pound strongman style deadlift. He was, pressing over 400 pounds over his head. He was near he was a 105 kilogram strict curl on a beater bar. So he was near the all-time record for that. Love him or hate him, he's one of the most accomplished strength athletes of this era. And certainly when it comes to powerlifting. And one of the things that like I, helped him, again, he deserves all the credit, but our program really kind of helped him get to his meets healthy. And that's something that I really kind of pride myself on. I'm not always the best at this. And again, you're the hardest person to coach, but again, I've done a lot of things wrong. And even in my last true meet, I did do like an impromptu meet at my buddy Chris Delafav's gym, where I totaled 2,100 pounds in a second weight class, and that ended up being my fifth elite. In hindsight, that wasn't the best idea, but I was just kind of getting fat anyway, so I weighed in as a light 308. And then I haven't been able to kind of get the weight off as quick. Now I am back like under 270 at the time of this recording, so that's good. But that's neither here nor there. I've had 1,000 pounds in my back. I was first and only man to squat 800 pounds in 6 weight classes. I've done big water cuts. And a lot of the those, I tried to figure out ways to do these things the safest way possible. When you start to get north, and when it comes to water cutting specifically, when you start to get north of 10% of your body weight. So for example, if you're a 200-pound man, in my opinion, it's not safe to cut 20 pounds. Any more than that, and then I know people do. And this is for a 24-hour weigh-in scenario. It's even less for like a 2-hour weigh-in. And honestly, for a 2-hour weigh-in, I think outside of a gut cut and things like that, that's a little bit outside of my scope. Again, admittedly, like I've coached more people on the untested side, even though most of them have been lifetime naturals, drug-free. But regardless of that, just a lot of times the untested feds, allow a 24-hour weigh-in, and a lot of the tested feds allow for a 2-hour weigh-in. And that's not the case. Like 100% Raw, I believe, does a 24-hour weigh-in, and they're all 100% tested, 100%, you know. And I know drug tested doesn't mean drug-free, but you get the idea. That's not the topic today. The topic of today is safety and like when to throw in the towel. So I've done, like, when I squatted 800 pounds in the 198 class for the first time, I was probably like 226 on the platform, and that was like kind of over. But for most of the prep, I was like kind of the end of prep anyway, I was probably like around 215. So again, under 20% of my body weight. I've done like from like 260 to 242. I've done like, 290 to 275. So I've always kind of been within that like kind of 10% kind of margin. When you start to kind of do more than 10% of the body weight, it gets very dangerous. And also the replenishment is always really important. A lot of people like get so excited about kind of making weight, and then they don't get the weight back on, or they don't get the weight back on the right way. So in terms of if you are going to do that, regardless of if you're cutting a lot of weight or not, it's imperative that you keep your fat intake low. A lot of people will have the pizza, pasta, pancakes diet after they weigh in, and regardless of if you're cutting a lot of weight or not, fat is going to impede and slow down your digestion. So you want to eat feeds. You want to eat foods that you're familiar with. You want to eat foods that are lower in fat. So things like rice, things like honey, table sugar. Oddly enough, like a lot of this kind of shit now, and you also want to keep the fiber content low as well. So if you are going to have some like kind of more dirty food, some treats, like I think something like, if you're going to have candy. So like, for example, these like, this is what Bryn's going to have for her meat. This is basically 100% sugar. There's a tiny bit of sodium. Now there's a lot of colors and weird stuff in here, so I wouldn't have this stuff all the time. And this is Nerds gummy clusters. So things like, gummies and lollies, and that could be fine. Again, I like to do honey and rice personally. So like if I'm doing like a 20-pound water cut or more, in that, or even 15 pounds or more, I'll do like a lot of rice and honey. And I've kind of found if I need to put back on 20 pounds, I need to do about like 4 liters of water. I'll do at least 5 grams of sodium, probably, a good amount of a good amount of potassium, and then also, about 1,000 carbs. And then as far as if I get some trace proteins, that's fine. If I get some trace fats, that's fine. But we're trying to replenish glycogen. We're trying to make sure the muscles are full. And in terms of equipped lifting, if you use benchers and squat suits and things of that nature, it's really important that you kind of fill out the right way. So sometimes people even advise like even doing like a light workout with body weight bands, and then just going for a walk to kind of make sure that the glycogen, if all the kind of food and fluid is just kind of pooling in your stomach, which will happen if you have a lot of fat, that's going to cause some problems. And as far as number one, I think that if you are only a few meets into your powerlifting career, if you are not a nationally ranked lifter, I consider nationally ranked a top 50 in your weight class and division. And that's been increasingly more difficult over the years, even in some of the divisions like, equipped lifting that just don't have as much competition. Again, if you want to qualify for a national meet, and even something like RPS Nationals has a qualifying total, it's very modest. I would say if you're able to do those totals, you're an above average lifter, but you're certainly not an elite lifter. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at a certain point, and even like you could argue, like even from what I've done some great, I've total elite in 5 weight classes. And a lot of the risks that I made, they were calculated risks. I wanted to make sure, because I was training all-time record holders at the time, and I may or may not be adding another one to our belt very soon, but time will tell. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag yet, but so I'm still training some pretty high-level lifters behind the scenes, but it's just not like what my focus is. At the end of the day, powerlifting to the people is about getting people exposed to the sport, using powerlifting as a journey for personal growth. And when you start to kind of like increase the risk factors because you're cutting so much weight, or you're doing programs that in my opinion are like unreasonable. So if things are like super high frequency and super high intensity for too long, if you're cutting weight for too long, if you're cutting weight too frequently, if you're constantly in a calorie deficit too frequently, if you're not having the right nutrients. So again, yes, this should be fun. Yes, this should be enjoyable, but I think you always need to kind of have your health in mind. And if your body is healthy and if you're taking your, and at the end of the, I think the big thing is just don't be in such a rush. Um, again, I've been competing since 2006. I only took 1 year off from competing. Now, I'm not going to be competing in powerlifting probably this year, next year, maybe for the next 2, 3 years. I plan on doing a meet again when I'm in the 40 category. And I'm just going to be focusing on strict curl right now, but I'm still training the lifts. Um, but it just at this stage in my life, like between family, businesses, and everything else, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And I'm just not in a position where I can kind of train for powerlifting safely. And also just mentally, I know that I will, which kind of happened over the years. I just ended up kind of like, just kind of rewind a little bit. So in like 2015, I squatted 900 pounds in the meet. I ended up then, months later, I squatted 1,000 pounds in training. I was kind of like ready to hang up like really heavy powerlifting at that point. But then fast forward, I started hitting, my working toward my goal of squatting 800 pounds in 6 weight classes. I checked that box off. And then in 2020, I did a bodybuilding show. So there was like a 4 to 5 year period where I was kind of in a chronic calorie deficit, at least for most of the year. And again, to my surprise, after the bodybuilding, I had a good rebound and hit my first 2,000 pound total, hit my first, hit my first elite total, hit my first 2,000 pound total, which was my debut at the Arnold. At the time, there was still qualifying requirements for the XPC finals, which was a big deal to me. That was always like a dream for me to do that. It took me 15 years of competing to hit my first elite. You need to be an elite level classification lifter to qualify for the XPCs finals at the Arnold. Now they kind of removed that requirement. So which is why we kind of switched over to doing the RPS Nationals, but that's a topic for another day. And then I came back, got a little bit bigger, a little heavier. I had to hit my first 2,100 pound total. I felt like I was good for a 900 pound squat that day, but I didn't have like the best handlers, no offense, in terms of knee wrapping and things like that. Did the best I could. I torched like 850, was called a little high, but I felt really strong. And 2,100 was the goal for that meet. So it wasn't trying to like, but it's kind of frustrating when, and then going into 2023. So anyways, I started to like, that's when I was trying to keep my body weight too low. I was still kind of, I hit a 701 pound deadlift in training, which was an all-time PR, ended up re-aggravating my shoulder. And I really kind of messed myself up. So again, I didn't really have someone managing my training. I didn't have someone telling me, no, you need to slow down. But again, I was trying to get one more meet in before being married. I was able to hit a 2080 total, which is still my best, like dots, Wilk score, whatever you want to call it, pound for pound total. I was as successfully able to beat Travis Rogers head to head, which was another kind of side quest. Yeah, so that was kind of like my send off. And then I did do a single ply meet. I did do another meet at 308 to get another elite total. But the 2023 meet was essentially like the last meet I really like prepped for like full bore. And it took a lot out of me, and I'm still kind of recovering from that. Still trying to get my health back in order. Blood work's been getting better, hormones have been getting better. I've been working with Life Med. But anyways, at a certain point, a lot of people, again, I have a lot of experience, and with experience comes wisdom. I have experience coaching people to all-time world records. I've experienced having 1,000 pounds in my back. I've experienced competing in 6 different weight categories. I've experienced helping elite level females, lightweight lifters, heavyweight lifters. I have a lot of experience. Raw, equipped, you name it. I'm not saying I'm the best, but if you look at data and results, I've also, been involved with judging, meet directing, spotting, loading, scorekeeping, running gyms, running, multiple locations. So I do a lot for the sport. The sport has done so much for me. And like anything else, with great power comes great responsibility. And this sport can fuck you up. Excuse my French. So it's really important that we take this strength training seriously, regardless of if you're a recreational lifter or if you're trying to break a record of some sort. But it's not worth dying for. It's not worth hurting yourself for. It's not worth, I'm a family man now. If I wasn't able to take care of our family, take care of our kids, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself. And it's one of the reasons I've taken a step back from the really heavy stuff. In strict curl, the risk is super low. Even powerlifting, the risk is super low. But again, when you start to kind of flirt with big weights for squatting it and benching specifically, and to a degree, deadlifts. And when you start mixing in water cuts, when you start mixing in things like reckless training, not communicating with your coach about these things, and if you start to think that you know better than someone with 20 years experience, you start to get a little bit too cocky. This is where you can really hurt yourself. Sometimes doing really well can be it can be a blessing and a curse because you start to get too cocky. I've been there. And that's when you can really mess yourself up. When you start to kind of combine dehydration, water cuts, poor nutrition. So that, like I said, at the RPS Nationals specifically, I'm not going to kind of name any lifters, but there was some lifters that they should have stopped. Some did some water cuts, some just kind of were overextending themselves. But in both cases, lifters passed out on the platform. They put the spotters at risk. They put themselves at risk. And at that point, a good friend, a good handler, a good coach is going to throw in the towel, and you're going to, just throw in the towel, and you're going to, stop competing, and you're going to, essentially eject yourself from the meet, eject yourself from the competition. And there's no shame in that, especially if you're like early in your career. Like again, for someone like myself, like again, it wasn't the smartest thing. Me trying to come back. So that meet in 2023, I got hurt in around, I think, June, July. I'm just going off memory here. And then I was competing in September. And it was a good experiment as a coach, but again, for myself, it was not smart. So I did a lot of suspended good mornings. I did a lot of special bar squats. I couldn't bench for a while. I couldn't deadlift for quite some time. I did very little specific training, and I was able to hit one of my best meets ever, but I only went 6 for 9. I still ended up cutting weight because that was part of the challenge, and that was not a great idea. And I'm still kind of feeling the effects of that. And it's 2025 at the time of this recording. So if you're like literally passing out on a lift, if you are at your limits, if you get a gift, if you're like squat, if you're like rounding over and squat, if you almost kind of like fall forward, all these different things, your body's telling you to stop. If you're not able to maintain good positions, if you're not able to, and again, like I was unaware of some of the weight cutting that was going on and things like that. So, if you need to like communicate with your coaches, your handlers, your team, and lower your openers, or just kind of and you need to like kind of, if you're like in a dehydrated state or if just something, sometimes you're just having an off day. You need to like take what's there in the day. It doesn't matter like what you did in training. It matters what's there. Now the training can give you some clues, but if the coach isn't aware of like your current state, so the communication is really important. And you're not only putting yourself at risk when you do this, when you do, so another kind of example, and I don't mind sharing this story because I don't think this guy would care anyway. He won't hear this, but Jason Coker, a fantastic lifter at a Westside Barbell. We were spotting and loading for the Westside Pro Invitational for 2 years. And then like anything else, people can't get along, so that stopped. But anyways, it was an amazing meet. Lots of world records. Got to see Laura Phelps break some records. Got to see David Hoff break some records. Rita West was really incredible. She had an injured shoulder and she won the meet and she was able to pay for her. So that's like kind of where like that's a do or die situation where maybe for Rita at that time it was worth it for her to kind of roll the dice. She needed money to pay for the surgery. She was able to hit a world record squat. I believe she did like 628 and then 148. Again, just going off memory, but fact check me on Open Powerlifting, Rita West. Yeah, so like that's an example where maybe that's a calculated risk. Maybe she needed to do that. Maybe she needed to, but most people are not doing that. Like, and most people are not, breaking world records, winning money. That's going to be help kind of put food on the table. Maybe John Hack is. So with Jason Coker, he had an all-time record bench, still one of the top benches in multiply to this day. It still might be number one. I'm not positive. He hit 900 in the 198 class, which is like mind blowing. Doesn't even make sense. But I did notice that the lockout was kind of soft. I don't know, like it was like a borderline call. He ended up getting credit for the lift. And I'm never the type of person that would say like, turn down the lift, all those sorts of things. If the umpire calls it a strike, it's a strike. If the umpire calls it a ball, it's a ball. Regardless of what your opinion is, you're not going to argue with the person making the call. You just roll with the punches as an athlete, and you're certainly not, especially if it's like in your favor. Sometimes you're going to get a call, sometimes you're not. Again, topic for another day. But anyways, Jason elected to go up to 920, even though the 900 was like an all-out effort and like it was not the best standard, and he barely got it. 920 ended up kind of coming back towards his face and nearly kind of cracked his skull. We were able to get it. We were very good even back then. We were a very good spotting crew. Um, could have been dead. I had a similar situation. We were training. I was training with Larry Williams. So at the time, Otis Perkins was in the hospital. You may know him as Black Tom Cruise. So I like to just do some training with Larry, just to kind of like build up his spirits, bring up his morale. Again, part of also being a coach is like helping with some of those intangible things. And again, not every coach is going to jive with the athlete, and maybe it's just not a good fit, and that's okay. But anyways, I always try to do my best to kind of give the athlete what they need. And at that time, Larry needed a good training partner because he just lost one to this, BTC, Otis Perkins, Black Tom Cruise, one of the greatest hype men of the game. If you want to check out an old episode, remembering Black Tom Cruise, um, he gave so much to his training partners. He gave so much to Larry. He gave so much to so many lifters. And if you want to kind of like know what a good training partner is, he's a great person to look up to. And I didn't do any of this meal prep, which is fine. But so, anyways, so I ended up kind of benching in my shirt one day, and I was going up to like 545, which was in my wheelhouse. Like again, it's a lift I've done many times before, and it kind of just got out of control, and it nearly landed on my neck. It was really scary. The video got a lot of tension, and I could have easily been dead. Larry was able to grab it really quickly. Jesse James West was not ready to spot a 500-pound plus bench. And we elected to use a bench that didn't have safeties because it had better lighting. Really stupid. And again, I'm glad but like, it's one of those things, like I do regret that. I fucked up. But I lived to tell the tale, and it's a cautionary tale. And again, I think that you shouldn't be afraid of lifting. Again, I've been under 1,000 pounds. I'm not fucking afraid of lifting. But you need to understand when the juice is worth the squeeze. And if you're cutting weight, if you're passing out, if you're putting your spotters in danger, if you're putting yourself in danger, and also when you're very dehydrated, you have a very high chance of like tearing a muscle. And there's other things that can happen. If you're squatting, the bar can like land on you and all these different things. Even with a bench press, if you're benching 135 to your throat from the top position is going to take you out. So I just think it's really important that we just always put safety as a priority. It's one of the reasons why, moving forward, unless it's like a novice meet or something like that, I'm not really going to support meets out of stands. Like if someone's really, really strong, there's a certain point where, I just don't think combo racks are safe. Same thing with like the bench press, like always making sure that the bench presses have safeties. Not all meets have that. And just making sure that like the lifters and meet directors, the people that we kind of hang with, that they have the lifters' health in mind first, regardless of, how recreational or high level of a lifter they are. So again, I love powerlifting. I love strength training, but it's not worth dying over. Nothing is. And maybe I'm getting a little bit soft in my old age, but if you're dead, you can't make progress. If you're dead, um, and again, it's not just about you too, but obviously if you're hurt, you're going to affect your family and your loved ones. And if you have kids and things like that, it's going to affect you. But also like if something happens to you, like on the platform, and it could have been avoided because you're just being stupid and reckless, you could also like really injure a spotter. Like I've seen it a lot of times. This happens a lot, unfortunately, at meets with combo racks. I've seen a lot of spotters like go to the hospital because they break their arms, whatever. They're just because they're not equipped to spot the loads that they're asked to. So I think it's just important that you know when to throw in the towel. You could always come back. Now, again, tomorrow's not guaranteed. I understand that, but if you're not in the state to perform at the highest level, like it's okay to like stop. There's no shame in that. Um, and there's been many kind of like, and I've kind of like a really famous example as of late, and I don't really know like, and I don't know if I 100% agree with this. I don't know the situation, but I'll just it's maybe worth mentioning. Like Simone Biles, one of the greatest gymnasts, female gymnasts of all time. I guess one of her like medications ended up being banned for like one of the Olympics. I think that might have been in China. Again, I could be speaking out of my ass, but I'm just going off memory. 50% facts here. But anyways, the whole point of that, and again, I don't know the whole context, and I'm not sure. Like, there's some other things. Like, I'm actually, admittedly, not the biggest Simone Biles fan. I actually recorded a podcast, me like kind of kind of calling her character into question. But regardless, she's a great athlete. And I ended up not like posting it because I didn't think I thought it was too negative, and I didn't think it was the message was going to be well received. But anyways, in the context of this discussion, she was not fit enough, whether it be mentally or physically, whatever the case may be. I think it was more of a mental thing because the medication was banned and she was having these like waves of anxiety. And I can't imagine like the pressure an Olympic athlete at her caliber would feel. And also essentially like, in her own right, or essentially, celebrity, with her popularity and stuff. She elected not to compete. And that hurt the team and hurt, the country, the medal count, and all these different things. But with something like gymnastics too, with some of the events for sure, not every single event, especially like when you're on the rings and the high bars and things where you're really high in the air, like you could really like have a career-ending injury. And if you're not in the right frame of mind, and same thing with like powerlifting, like if I'm getting under an 800-pound squat, a 900-pound squat, 1,000-pound squat, a 600-pound squat, that weight could end you. Even like a light bench, if you don't have the safeties like set up and stuff. And that's why I get on our guys and girls, setting up the safety chain, setting up the safety racks, regardless of if you're spotters or not, especially if you're training at home. If you're training at home, like safeties for the bench and the squat should be mandatory. If you're training alone, if you're training at home. At Mount Vernon Barbell, a guy died because he was benching with a slingshot alone. A bar landed on his neck. No one was there to kind of help him, and he was dead. So these things do happen. Especially benching is probably like the most common cause of death, and these occurrences are rare, but still, the fact that they happen and they could have easily been avoided with just some precaution. And if you know that if you like are a coach or a teammate and you let someone kind of perform when they're not in the right state to perform, shame on you. Shame on you. And there's been some calls where I've kind of made some mistakes, but a lot of times I err on the side of, hey, like let's scratch your third attempt, or hey, let's move on, or hey, when Larry broke his all-time world record in the 308s in 2020, when he did a 2370 total, which is still one of the greatest totals of all time in sleeves, pound for pound, as well as in absolute strength. We didn't take a third deadlift. He tore his callus, and he had more. But what was the point? Does that make him a wuss? He hit his goal. He hurt his hand. He was done. I think he had 2,400 in him that day, but we'll never know. And it's kind of a moot point. So, anyways, like I said, I hate to like kind of I want to kind of wrap this up in a positive way. Powerlifting is amazing. Strength training is amazing. Training partners are amazing. It's important that when you're picking a coach, when you're picking a training crew, there's a time to be a cheerleader and there's a time to lend support. And there's a time where sometimes you have to have a real hard conversation. And sometimes you have to say no. Sometimes you have to say, hey, man, you need to stop. This isn't safe. I'm not going to support this. That's what a good training partner will do when the time is right. There's a time to push and there's a time to hold back. When you're not in the right physical and or mental state, sometimes it's better off that you just throw in the towel. Live to fight another day. Thank you guys so much for listening. If this podcast helped you, please give it a 5-star review. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. Until next time, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.